Hello, Brian from the Spooky Time Brian here, and happy Halloween. Don't exactly know how you plan to trick-or-treat this year, so just do what adults do, buy a big bag of Kit Kats, and watch a scary movie. Speaking of scary movies, I finally sat down and watched what is sometimes called the scariest movie. Like, out of all of them.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.
Me and this movie didn't start on the right foot at all. I was a preteen in the late 2000s and not even a big movie fan yet. There was not a single reason for me to care about The Exorcist, but people my age at least knew of it because of this stupid scary maze game. But I first saw it because it was a screamer on an old clickbaity Call of Duty, World at War, Zombies Easter egg video. I don't think I even knew screamers existed at this point. So I'm just watching a video and suddenly I'm greeted with the Exorcist girl just shrieking at me. And after that, for a while, it really gave me the heebie-jeebs because I knew this image as the Scary Maze girl before I even knew she was from The Exorcist. I don't think that's the sole reason I hadn't seen it till now, but for a long time that was my main association with the movie. Not that I had anything against it once that association wore off, but my first sign that this was something I really had to make sure I saw was when I found out it was directed by William Friedkin, who directed one of the best movies ever made, The French Connection. Knowing Friedkin would bring his sensibility to it, it suddenly seemed possible The Exorcist could be the actual spookiest movie ever. I mean, something's gotta be. Right off the bat, I can say The Exorcist does hold up, but only if you understand why it has that status in the first place. I think it depends on what you think is scary, like any other horror movie ever made, but in terms of constructing a narrative to build your horror upon, few movies have as effective a framework as The Exorcist. Like many horror movies considered the best critically, the frightening nature of The Exorcist has its roots in suspense over straight-up scares from minute one. People nowadays might not consider it the scariest movie ever made because it does not have the biggest number of scary things in it. I'm not even referring to stuff with an overabundance of jump scares, I mean even in comparison to, like, The Witch. Because the designated scary parts are saved for the end, most people's thoughts on it are a little like, This is...
What? This is boring.
If you're going in like, alright, scariest movie ever made, impress me, that's a complete misunderstanding of what it's trying to do. The Exorcist is not scary because a little girl is possessed by a demon. Well, okay, it is. I mean, it's scary because something is observably wrong with her that nobody can explain. It takes advantage of one of my favorite storytelling devices, dramatic irony. One of the oldest explanations of cinematic suspense is Alfred Hitchcock explaining the bomb under the table theory.
Four people are sitting around a table, talking about baseball, whatever you like. Suddenly, a bomb goes off, blows the people to smithereens. What do the audience have? 10 seconds of shock. Now take the same scene and tell the audience there is a bomb under that table and will go off in 5 minutes. Now the conversation about baseball becomes very vital because they're saying to you, don't be ridiculous, stop talking about baseball, there's a bomb under there.
Except the demon inside Reagan is the bomb. With a title like The Exorcist, you know she's possessed by a demon before any of the characters do. There's tension in wondering whether or not the characters will figure it out for themselves before it's too late. Exploiting that advantage, the movie remains grounded in reality enough to create, in them, a reasonable doubt that's what's wrong with her. From there, we're guided to meditate on how unrealistic it actually is for one to conclude somebody they know is possessed, There's the unspoken realization that we only look down on the characters for not realizing Reagan's possessed because of that dramatic irony. If we were in Ellen Burstyn's position, we probably wouldn't think of that at first either. Over the course of the movie, Reagan's condition worsens, and explanations as to what might be wrong with her grow fewer in number. The institution of medicine that Burstyn placed all her faith in ends up failing her. As a character who isn't religious, you're not just watching a mother unable to help her suffering child, but at the same time someone who's caught in the unraveling of their belief system. People famously ran out of the theater screaming and fainted.
But the thing that really surprises me is people faint. I mean, I've never in my life known a movie where people would faint. I mean, it's hard to make people faint.
Which leads me to think they probably didn't stay long enough to see the exorcism. So it's gotta be something that happens before then that scared them. It's worth noting that a kid being possessed was probably more novel at the time than it is in 2020. Creepy kids are a staple of horror now, but in the 70s it was a fresh idea for the mainstream. That corruption of innocence just hit harder than it does now, but it's not like they used it as a cheap trick either. The film is written and directed so that theme will resonate with the audience. For example, the scene where Reagan holds her mother's head to her groin and tells her, "Lick me," kind of breaks the fourth wall. It means that, however remote, Linda Blair had to have some comprehension of what her character was doing. Maybe it isn't the scariest movie of all time anymore, but it's definitely the scariest movie of all time relative to when it came out. You showed a bunch of young adult boomers a movie where a little girl tells a guy his mom sucks cocks in hell, and a bunch of hippies a horror movie about Christianity turning out to be real. What did you think was gonna happen? In my last video, I talked about Halloween movies and how they can be elevated by the season. This isn't one of those. What's nice about The Exorcist is that even if it wasn't scary at all, it's an otherwise really great film. It takes its time, develops character, and builds suspense. The opening scene in the Iraqi desert was filmed in Iraq with real Iraqi people. Max von Sydow as Father Merrin is introduced amidst an anthropological excavation. He discovers a little amulet in the ground which intrigues him. We aren't told why, but this leads him to investigate another part of this ancient city. The cinematography gives the desert a sense of scale. Merrin might just be a lone man venturing through these massive ruins, but he's still able to make sense of them and find these possible connections. He's clearly serious business and a guy with some kind of intellectual authority. The guards even stand down once they see it's him. Merrin finds a statue that resembles the amulet, and from the very first shadow cast on his face, everything about this scene tells us the connection between the two objects carries some kind of evil entity. It climaxes in this great shot, symbolically pitting the two against one another. This is the first 6 minutes with barely a word of dialogue. You have to go in ready to appreciate the subtleties of how the movie sucks you into the story before scaring you. Friedkin is incredible at presenting something without spectacle but preserving the impact, saying something without really telling you. There's no scene spelling out how exactly Father Karras feels like he's done wrong by his mother, but it's still understood. There is so much to talk about with each character and what their interweaving story tells us about them. Each actor brims with personality. The Exorcist hits you with Lee J. Cobb, Ellen Burstyn, Jason Miller, and Max von Sydow in old age makeup so good it's literally just how he looked when he was older. Linda Blair gives a great performance even though she has to act through a ton of special effects and makeup. The movie is actually quite repetitive when you think about it. Someone goes into Reagan's room and then recuperates and discusses what their next move should be. But how violating an experience it is to face her works every single time because of how it's presented to us. I watched the director's cut, and from what I understand, there's fewer subliminal demons faces in the original. That's a better choice, I think. But the ending of the director's cut with Kinderman and Father Dyer going to the movies makes up for it. Both endings leave it up to your personal thoughts whether or not the demon truly won, but I think the director's cut is truer to life. Even if evil wins in an isolated incident, the eerie truth is the world keeps on turning and life goes on. Looking back, The Exorcist might not seem as special because so much stuff copied it. It's hard to watch it without noticing the entire subgenre of possession horror standing on its shoulders. Much like films such as 2001 or The Searchers, the entire genre was reset by them, and over the years everything they did has been repurposed in some way that better suits a modern audience. The Exorcist in particular has been subject to a ton of parody, so it might be hard for some people to take these lines usually delivered for comedy's sake seriously. I think if the genre tricks were all these movies had to fall back on, it'd be fair to call them dated. But like a lot of classic movies, The Exorcist has a far better handle on storytelling than its copycats. It's better directed and written, but it holds up so well the conventions everybody copies are still done better here. Everything in the movie was done practically, with many iconic scenes that still look impressive. They really made this whirlwind of stuff in Reagan's room. The room really was cold enough to see the priest's breath. They really rolled a guy down these stairs. The exorcism is only maybe the last 20 minutes, and it's still the best dramatic example of cinematic demon possession we have. The Exorcist is an adaptation of a book by the same name. Ordinarily, you'd have to worry about something getting lost in translation, but they got the author, William Peter Blatty, to write the screenplay, so there's little argument it does the book justice. And while I think Friedkin could still have made the movie work if he wrote it himself, I think his and Blatty's priorities are somewhat mismatched, although thankfully in ways that help each other. Blatty cares more about the religious connotations of the story and making sure the faith is respectfully represented than Friedkin does. But Friedkin is the mad scientist of the two who can tinker with the filmmaking to make it the most effective. The heavy religious imagery and themes need to be fleshed out for the story to work. If all that stuff was just incidental, this evil that's unleashed on the world doesn't feel like it's encroaching on as much. Even though the events of the movie affect maybe a dozen people, the stakes feel so much higher. The two seem to have an understanding of how much the other contributed to the film, that neither of them could have accomplished what they put together here alone. I'm always pleased when a classic movie lives up to my expectations. I can definitely understand a frame of mind that saw this and was petrified because the storytelling is so effective. Even though I'm personally scared considerably more by other films, the effective suspense in filmmaking holds up very well. It strings you along with characters you have an intimate understanding of and empathize with. I highly encourage anybody who thinks this movie is dated or boring to give it a second chance, and please, try your hardest to distance it from any overly lofty expectations, all the parodies you may have seen, and anything else that might break your immersion. It's very, very good. It's time for me to go now. But don't worry. I hope you don't think you've seen the last of me, Brian from the channel Brian. Either way, thanks for tuning in. I'll always cherish the time we share with one another. And you know, have a good day. Happy Halloween.